This is a climb that doesn't need much introduction, called the Madone. There's a bit of debate about the official starting point, as there's various ways to climb up from sea level. The most widely accepted segment is Col de la Madone via Gorbio, which starts after any major junctions. And the starting point's at this gate here, which isn't really all that obvious and kind of took me a while to figure out. Why not start a 30-minute effort by standing up for ages? Don't really know what I'm doing here, but I think I was just trying to shake out my legs, which were a bit stiff. So it's just under 10k at around 7%. Fairly consistent, has a few flatter sections, but it never gets too steep. It's got a lot of history behind it as the fitness testing grounds for Lance Armstrong and more recently pros like Chris Froome and Richie Porte. And on a more personal note, this was kind of the first proper hard effort I did on a European climb back in 2020 when my mum started a job in Monaco and I stayed in the area for about a month, which cemented my love for going hard up mountains. This was back in my road racing days, which I never really enjoyed that much, so that's why I'm not doing it anymore. So I actually quite enjoyed having months of being able to just ride during lockdown. So I basically spent the year doing Zwift races and loads of local climbs, and consequently got way fitter. I hadn't ridden that much in Europe apart from races that mostly didn't go very well. So it was kind of the first time I had to just ride proper mountains and enjoy it. It's kind of a yearly routine since 2020 to do an effort up Madone. And every year I think, right, I'm not doing that again because I'm not going to be able to get a PR. But so far, each year's gotten a bit better. Although I don't think this trend will continue much longer, to be honest. That's probably it. It's definitely a love-hate relationship. I've never completed an effort up here that's felt perfectly executed, but that's probably not even possible anyway. My legs didn't feel fantastic during this effort, but I do think it's as fast as I could have gone, so I'm definitely happy with this effort, and I don't think I'll be improving on it for quite some time. I always struggle with the first section of this climb. It's a nice, wide, smooth road, but it feels steeper than it looks, so it's hard to feel good for the effort you're doing, if that makes sense. You also don't approach it with any real momentum as the road is already climbing up before the official start point. I made a real conscious effort to loosen up my arms and keep it under control. The first few minutes of any effort always really drag by, and I remember looking down and seeing that only 3 minutes had passed, which, considering how hard it felt at that point already, was not a good sign. I've heard people say that they think this climb is overrated, but I don't really agree. They probably just say that because of how outrageously fast the top male times are, which makes anyone feel bad about themselves. One complaint is that it doesn't take you deep into the mountains, but I actually think that's partly the appeal of it. I really love being properly in the depths of the mountains, away from everything, but it's nice to have a climb close to the coast because it's easily accessible and you can ride it year-round without having to go miles to get there. And it still takes you away from the coastal hustle bustle, and it can be immensely quiet and peaceful at the top. So yeah, the first half of this climb is on a fairly wide road. It sweeps around a few times, but there's nothing particularly memorable about it, I guess. I'd gone for a little ride in the morning and felt pretty terrible, but I was quite motivated to give this effort a bash. And to be honest, I think with tired legs, like at some point, no matter how fresh you are, the effort's going to get really painful. So the only difference is that maybe you start the effort feeling a bit better. Obviously not if you're properly fatigued, but having legs that are a little sore or not feeling too great, I think it kind of goes out the window quite quickly once you're actually deep into an effort. Because you can be, fresh and completely raring to go, but if you're doing 30-minute max effort, it's going to be pretty darn painful for a lot of it. I think it was last year I had the live segment Garmin feature turned on, and for some reason it started showing Chris Froome's time, and it was pretty demoralising. I think it was showing him like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes ahead. So yeah, believe it or not, I turned that feature off after that. And here's a comparison of my yearly efforts. It's quite interesting. It kind of shows that I paced it fairly evenly every time. I remember the first few times I rode it really struggling in the latter half because I probably overcooked it a bit early and underestimated the length of the section from St. Agnes. It's pretty funny to look back at 2020, obviously, 2 and a bit years ago, and I really thought that was kind of the fastest I'd ever be able to do, and like looking back on it now, my time was pretty slow. I'll shut up for a bit now. Sorry again that this commentary is so terrible. I find talking pretty difficult, and somehow I forget how to speak like a normal person whenever I try and do this. And you can see St. Agnes in the background there, which in a few minutes the road will sweep back and start heading towards it. And St. Agnes will mark the halfway point, more or less. So this turn in St. Agnes is what marks the more or less the halfway point. You do a sharp turn, but the road does flatten out a bit, so you actually pick up quite a lot of momentum as you go around this corner. And the road changes quite dramatically here. It goes from nice, pretty wide road to a fairly bumpy, single track type road. So going into this, I just had a rough idea of my halfway split, which was 15.5 minutes. And when I was approaching St. Agnes, I was thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to be like a minute and a half off my time. But that last section, the kind of straight bit as you near the village, always takes way longer than you think. So when I got there, I was actually about 30 seconds up on my previous time. But that was enough of a confidence boost to encourage me, give me a bit of motivation. And so after this little flat section, it ramps back up again. And this was the first time I went into my little ring on this effort. The road is basically just bumpy enough that it gets kind of annoying when you're trying to put out power. And yeah, so here's quite a decently long flat section. This is where I tend to struggle, as it's just hard to keep applying power on flatter sections. I was going to make more of an effort to get the speed up on this section, as in previous efforts I've kind of eased off way too much, but I did not do that. I was already suffering a fair amount, so I did ease off a bit. It's difficult as well because I wanted to sit up to try and stretch things out and open up the airways, but at the same time you're going significantly faster than most of the climb on this flat bit, so being aero is probably also important, so it's a bit of a weird balancing act. You also can't properly see around the turns, so it's it's a bit difficult to completely keep the gas on. It tends to be a pretty quiet road, but you can get some bad drivers screeching around the corners. And there's also a couple of these tunnels with low visibility. It gets really busy up here with cyclists on the weekends, but in the week it can be super quiet. I've been up here early morning on a few occasions, and it's actually kind of scary how few people you see. On this day it was a bit overcast, so it doesn't look all that nice, but when I rode the climb in the summer, there's some really stunning vistas. When I did my 2021 effort, there was actually rally car drivers practicing for an upcoming event, which made the second half of the climb quite adrenaline fueled because there's lots of cars going absolutely tanking around the corners towards me. So I was pretty glad to have a clear run on this time. In my 2022 effort, it was actually really cold. It started sleeting a bit, and it actually got a lot worse after the effort, so it could have been worse. And then the conditions for this ride were actually pretty ideal. It was warm enough that I wasn't getting cold when warming up, but not too hot that I was overheating on the climb. And for some reason, I never went back into the little ring. Normally I would not be riding in the big ring on these kind of gradients, but I just committed to it for some reason. I found myself cross-training and didn't want to risk switching back into the little ring, especially with the bumpy road surface. And I think it actually helped me a bit because it forced me to keep applying power. Whereas if you drop into a small gear, it's easy to keep clicking down until you're back at a comfortable cadence. But this made me keep the power up in order to keep a decent cadence going. And although I've ridden this climb quite a lot, I always forget where exactly the end is. There's a few little turns towards the end, and previously, I remember the first few times I rode it, I kind of sprinted for the top before realising that I still had another 2 or 3 minutes to go. But it was kind of the opposite experience on this one, actually. You can't see the actual summit until you're pretty close to it. But once you pass this little hut on the side, you know there's only a minute or two to go. And it does flatten out at the top, so you can start to empty the tank if you have anything left. And yeah, in this section, I was just not composed at all. I was like rocking over the bike, just trying to force my legs around, especially with riding a bit of a higher gear than I would normally choose to. I still had enough to just stand up and throw the bike around to get over the line, and there we have it. Really pretty painful, but yeah. I've done a lot of hill efforts recently, but it's been a while since I've done a proper max effort, and it was just a really good feeling to push myself to that limit and remember what it's like to properly do an all-out full gas effort. So yeah, that's Col de la Madone. Not only pretty famous, but also a favourite of mine, kind of. For me, the effort was 29 minutes 44 seconds at 271 watts. I think that's round about a PB at maybe 5.5, 5.6 watts per kilogram. Although, yeah, never trust power meters anyway, because last year's effort was actually a couple more watts, but over a minute slower, so yeah. Gotta take it all with a pinch of salt. Either way, I did what I wanted to do, which was just go as hard as I could. And yeah, they've fairly recently installed this sculpture at the top, which says enjoy, which is kind of interesting. And it's hard not to enjoy such a great climb.